Welcome to another episode of 10 Myths That Are Blocking Special Education Systems Change. This is number 4, the Kids Today myth. And I'm really excited to introduce the guest I have this week, Alexis Reed. How I met you. I was attending UDL Con on your presentation. And I thought, oh, something on executive skills. I'm interested. But you twisted it to looking at teachers' executive skills, not the students, not the learners.
Mm.
And I listened to you. There were things that I heard that I'd never heard before about executive skills that I thought, okay, I have to introduce you to my audience. And so, how about if you tell us a little bit about your background?
Yeah, thank you. And thanks
Get
so
here.
much for having me, Amy. I'm really pleased to be here. My whole world is a little bit different than I'd say a lot because I kind of have blended a lot of the different areas that I've studied and learned about over the years into the work I do every day. So technically, I'm an educational therapist and learning consultant in private practice, which is called Read Connect LLC. I specialize in executive function, but also social emotional learning, positive youth development, and really thinking about how we design flexible environments through the UDL lens. And that's essentially my job is how can we actually look at the intersections between education and mental health to bring it together to understand that learning and doing is so emotional. There's a lot of different resources that I'm actually in the middle of producing and putting together that I hope to be able to share soon. But one most important one that is free and accessible to everyone is the Read Connected podcast, which is available on all platforms where myself and my brother, who's a clinical and sports psychologist, and he and I are both professors teaching in university as well. We talk about so many things. Again, this idea of connection, connect and education, right? How do we bring together all the pieces of our human experience to be able to learn more about ourselves and each other and the systems and supports that are available? So we talk about everything from performance to well-being, learning, executive function, psychology, and so much more.
Well, we will definitely put a link to that podcast in the
Cool.
show
Thank
notes
you.
for this. And I'm thinking, what a fabulous background you have so that you're not just coming in like I'm a teacher looking at this. You have been in all looking at people of different ages, what the organization needs. Oh, I love that. Okay, so let's focus on the myth that we're talking about today.
Yeah.
And I'm delighted to have you be one of my new friends. So,
Me too.
so here's the problem. I hear teachers say kids today have changed.
Mm.
In the good old days when I started teaching, the kids would sit there and they were obedient and they were compliant. They did everything I told them. And today, kids aren't like that at all. They are resistant and they are oppositional and there are all these things they have all these excuses and kids have changed. Do you hear anything about this? Do you hear this out there in
So
the
much
world
so.
anywhere?
Oh, so much so. And the reality is that human evolution doesn't happen that fast, right? So it can't just shift and change in a few decades, right? We have seen influences that have impacted the way neurodevelopment has been shifting and changing. And that's a lot of my background is in child and adolescent development and thinking about neuroscience and how our brains are shifting and changing. And you know better than most that the more we're exposed to, the more our brains will shift and change depending on what we are interacting with, the way in which we are supported and nurtured and guided. So kids might be changing, but we all are. I think the advent of technology and so much has evolved how we navigate through our worlds every day.
I wonder if people's brains have changed, although
Mm.
we understand that being around screens and all of that does change the way our brains process information. But I think the truth is kids have changed. They expect to find value in school. And
Mm.
they want value in school. And when they're not getting value because the teacher is doing something like I'm going to dump information on you, they're not engaged, they're not excited. their executive skills are not hooked in. So we can blame the kids and say they need to get fixed, or we can say, what can we do about it?
I get such a visceral reaction when I hear people say these kids just need to change, right? There's something wrong with them. In fact, I work with a lot of young people who come in and they list off all the diagnoses and concerns that they've heard they have. And I look at them and I go, cool, what are we working on, right? What do we want to actually improve? And when it comes down to it, I'm so passionate about executive functions and emotional regulation because it's really the foundation to be able to do anything. So these kids have changed, but they're eager to learn. They have access to so much information. But how do we as educators help them to learn better? In Universal Design for Learning, we talk about expert learning, and it's how do I know how I learn best, and how do I apply that across contexts and situations? And the thing that kids have changed with is that they are very adaptable. They are more strategic than ever. But how do we hone that as educators to help them to be strategic learners, which is where executive function comes in, right? Being able to inhibit, being able to hold on to information and use it to do something, and be cognitively flexible enough to, navigate different situations as they shift and change.
So as I listen to you, I think about this is true for all kids, but when you add the layer of somebody has a disability
Hmm.
diagnosis,
Hmm.
a learning disability, they have attention deficit, they have autism, they have a behavioral disability, they have any kind of a disability, or they're learners of English, or they're like they have some personal needs, then there's an additional layer. We all need to develop our executive skills, and the frontal lobe doesn't develop until late adolescence and all the rest of that. So you can't expect a 2-year-old to behave the way we would hope a 16-year-old would behave.
Hmm.
But
Hmm.
they're not fully developed either. But when you add on the extra labels, then I think there's a whole nother layer of understanding and becoming an expert learner.
I
Because
get
not only do I have to understand how learning happens, I have to learn how learning happens in my brain and be
that's
able to advocate not as an excuse, but as a what do I need to be responsible as an expert learner myself?
yeah.
And so that changes the role of teachers, doesn't it?
It does, right? You wouldn't, just sit a kid closer to the teacher or to the board so that they can see. You would give them the glasses that they need to be able to, tune their vision, right? It's all about how do we tune in to what they need and help them to understand that. Because when they know what they need, they know it's helpful, it actually helps them to regulate, right? When they can advocate for themselves, they can regulate their emotions enough to access the learning that is happening in the classroom. But there's a big shift that kids are looking for because they're used to being engaged. And when they're not engaged and it's more passive learning, it's more difficult for them to tune in. It's not that everybody has attention deficit. It's just really that they need to learn how to focus and use their attention. And we as educators, we can leverage that by helping them to be involved in the learning, right? But it also, the reason why my talk was about how educators use their skills is that when we were trained as educators, we were trained to go through a curriculum and make sure you cover all the material, and that's still the message across general and special ed. But the reality is that we need to find different on-ramps, right? We need to allow for the environment to also shape and support these learners as they're navigating through their day. It's not a one size fits all situation. And no child or individual should think just because I can't do it the way somebody told me, there's something wrong with me.
But teachers start thinking, okay, if I have 25 kids in my class or
Mhm.
33 kids in my
Mhm.
class or 12 kids in my class, is it my job to use this UDL and adjust to everyone? Yes. And it's also your job to help the students figure out what they need. So if you have different options, then the students choose what is the method that works for them. And that's not an overnight, like, okay, wave my magic wand, tomorrow they're all going to do it.
No. But that's another myth that we could talk about, that UDL is about individualizing and personalizing everything for everyone. If we did that across the board, everybody would be exhausted, even the learners included, because they would be constantly shifting. And cognitive flexibility is a higher order executive function skill that comes online much later in life, which takes a lot of practice. That's why we see so much rigidity, that when we get stressed and anxious, we just want to do things one way. We don't have that flexibility. But the reality is that we can actually build in systems. And most teachers do this already, but we can be intentional about it, right? Where do certain things belong? What is the schedule that could be more predictable, right? How do we actually support these little nuances in a very intentional way? It doesn't need to be that everybody needs something different all the time, even though an individual, we could think down to a preference of a color, right? Like I prefer to use purple to correct my work versus red, right? Having that option built into the environment so students can access it is the same in which, if a student needs a highlighter or a guide for their reading to be able to track where they're at, if they need more of a digital technology to access the learning that's happening in the classroom, to have that assistive technology available, that those things are just built in rather than an add-on. We can anticipate that there's going to be variability and different needs. How do we proactively plan for that? And it's not giving a million options that causes cognitive overload, which is a whole nother story. But it is about providing appropriate and intentional options. And this is where, when we get students involved to learn about their learning, this is where they can create that access. So the myth of kids are changing, they are changing because they're noticing that when things aren't right and things aren't working, that friction that we actually want to help them to learn and grow, that friction can be more with the teacher that maybe is looking down at them, that they can't quote unquote do a thing. They just might need a different path or a route to get there.
I love that. Yeah, I love how you explained it too, because that in some ways, once you figure out how you're going to like flip the switch and say,
Mm,
look, each of you learners, you're in charge of your own learning. I'm not in charge of your learning, and I can make it as interesting for you and you and you and you as I can. I can give you different avenues for how to access it, but how you're going to process it, what your method is. So there are different things that they can build in that shifts the hard work of
mm,
learning from the teacher cramming it down their throat while they resist
yeah.
to the students saying, I'm curious. I want to learn. This is something I want to be able to do for my life.
Yeah.
And so that kind of debunks our myth that,
I would say so. And I have been fortunate to also be trained as a Montessorian. So Maria Montessori figured this out almost a century ago, where she was talking about when we have the nomenclature, the language, and then we build in with scaffolds and supports to get to abstraction. Sometimes we expect students to get to the abstraction before they've actually had the chance to get messy, to make some mistakes, to figure things out, to practice in different ways. That's what we all crave. It's not just about absorbing information, right? This is why there's, I think, a rub against technology sometimes, because it's not just about the content, it's about the process of learning. And that's where we really need to go back to. And I think, students want that. They do that every day and they have access to tools. And we need to be able to show them in the classroom that we can do that too here together. I say that our jobs are to coach and to help them develop their inner coach, because that's where we see motivation and engagement. It's not just about compliance, because when kids are just sitting and just listening and absorbing, there's a lot being missed. So I always say my greatest strategy to offer to all educators and parents and individuals, even other students alike, is to get curious. If something doesn't make sense or if something seems to be, a little bit off, get curious. Don't just pass it by or label it as something or say, oh, they just can't, right? That they just can't myth is absurd, right? I think it should be erased from anything. Even the old dog, new tricks like phrase, we need to get rid of all of that because our brains are so malleable and plastic that we can actually build and grow. But we need to get down to thinking about the basics. How do we introduce scaffold support and then gradually release those scaffolds, regardless of your cognitive profile or your age or anything, right? We can always build and grow and learn. And that's the beauty of humanity, in my opinion.
Alexis, I could talk to you all day. But
I
I try to
really
keep
get
these
that.
short.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
oh my gosh, I have like five more questions. I'm going to have you come back because
Okay.
there are so many things you said that I would like to dig deeper into. So, will you come back another time? So,
For sure. I'd love
okay.
that. I
I'm
love
going to finish this myth series and then I'm going to have some other interviews where we could just brainstorm together about things. There's so much you just have said. So, thank you.
You're
So,
so welcome.
you've already told us about your blog. Anything else that if people wanted to get in touch with you, you've told us about your consulting business, and we'll put that link in the show notes too.
Again, the podcast is probably the greatest way to get the information out. We have guests across all walks of life and phenomenal researchers and practitioners and musicians and athletes, thinking about different pathways to being able to find your fullest potential. And I believe that that's the most important thing in life. So I'm grateful to be a part of a lot of people's journeys and now to be a part of yours and to your subscribers. So I just want to just share gratitude for those who are out there doing the work. There's so much work to be done.
And you know what? None of us can do it alone.
Mm-mm.
It's we need to form alliances. I Let's just get rid of all things that look like competition because we are all collaborators working towards some kind of a system that nurtures teachers, that nurtures kids, nurtures families, because that's what we're going to need for this world. So
100%. We need to support and lift all of you out there up and just know that we are here doing our work in the background to do as much as we can to support you all too.
thank you.
Yeah.
And my big announcement is um, we have launched our time travel series. And these are Zoom calls that you can sign up for. I'll put the link below in the chat or in the show notes. Um, these are going to be 1 hour Zoom calls that over several weeks, and each week there's a slightly different theme, but we're looking at what will schools look like as an
Mm,
inclusive school community in the year 2030, where
mm,
we have achieved everything we wanted to do. Executive function is everybody understands that, and schools are set up as nurturing places for teachers, executive function, and students. And they're learners and there are no kids left out and families are welcomed and their partners. So we're going to be designing this again. It's not Amy's idea of where we're going. It's a community and all these people have signed up, but there's still room. You can sign up for to be on those. If you click on the link, you can sign up and then you'll get the Zoom link too. And we're just going to play together and go, strap on your safety harness to take the time travel. I'm a time travel agent. Anyway,
love
that's
it.
what I'm most looking forward to. And so that link will be there. So let me close this because otherwise we're going to keep going and I know I'll just keep going. Um, so this was myth number 4, the
Mm.
kids today myth, which I think we have debunked.
Kids today
So,
are pretty amazing. We just need to give them the opportunity to figure that out for themselves too.
hey, I'll second that. Thank you, Alexis, for being
Oh, thank you so much.